IRS intends to ramp up enforcement. That includes criminal investigation for certain assets. Meanwhile, the agency has also released its tax scam Dirty Dozen. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more.
The IRS says it will increase enforcement in the area of digital asset transactions and listed transactions. Digital assets include cryptocurrency and other digital holdings. A listed transaction is a transaction that is the same or very similar to any transaction the IRS has determined to be a tax avoidance transaction. The IRS says these issues occur in many taxpayer segments, with data showing a higher potential for non-compliance. U.S. judges allow the IRS to use John Doe summons for owners of digital assets. That forces a crypto exchange or bank, for example, to provide information to the IRS about someone's identity, which could be difficult to discover otherwise. Officials are promising not to increase the number of audits on small businesses and households making under $400,000 per year. Meanwhile, the IRS released its Dirty Dozen tax scam list for 2023. The agency warns that people should avoid sharing sensitive personal data over the phone, email, or social media to avoid getting caught up in these scams. Some of these include fake refunds, where scammers entice people with a large payout and instead steal personal information to use for identity fraud. Another is phishing, where scammers pretend to be real organizations like a bank or the IRS. Fake charities are another scam. Fraudsters take advantage of natural disasters and other crises. People must also be aware of social media refunds. This is where scammers promote little-known tax documents like Form 8944 to lure taxpayers with additional refunds. The forms are real, but many people are not eligible for these refunds and end up making an inaccurate filing or losing personal information. Another dishonest attempt to get your money is called offers in compromise. Those are used by people who cannot pay to settle their tax debts. Fraudsters take advantage and offer misleading solutions to people who do not actually meet the criteria. The IRS says these scams happen throughout the year and not just during the tax season. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
A St. Louis judge has sanctioned the local prosecutor. The judge says the prosecutor, who reportedly received money from George Soros, didn't handle a criminal case properly.
St. Louis Judge Teresa Counts-Burke sanctioned Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner's office. That's for allegedly withholding evidence in a double murder case. A man was held without bond since January after he was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Those charges were recently reduced to involuntary and voluntary manslaughter, and the suspect was released on bond while his April trial was postponed until June. The man's lawyers accused Gardner's office of not turning over evidence, including a 911 call recording and DNA evidence. Judge Burke ruled in favor of the suspect's lawyers, writing, "There has been a lack of diligence on the part of the state in following up and providing discovery to the defendant in a timely fashion." Under Burke's order, the man will have to remain on GPS monitoring. She also ordered the Circuit Attorney's office to hand over the remaining evidence. Gardner said in a statement that her office is working with police to bring justice on behalf of the people of the city of St. Louis, victims, and their families. The St. Louis Police Officers Association accused Gardner of misconduct, writing, "These repeated problems are due to the incompetence of the Circuit Attorney's office." This comes just days after Gardner, a Democrat, said she will run for re-election in 2024. According to the Missouri Times, Gardner received campaign funding from the George Soros' Safety and Justice Committee, and she reportedly worked with the Vera Institute of Justice, which received $11 million from a Soros foundation.
A new furry friend is becoming an increasingly popular house pet in the UK. They can weigh up to 30 pounds, and they're definitely cuddly. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more.
This is Jackson. He's a Continental giant rabbit, and he's a big boy.
I mean, he's almost 11 kilos, and most people's dogs don't come up to that. You know, a small spaniel will be 11.5, 12 kilos. And he's solid. I mean, when you pet him like a dog.
Continental giant rabbits are so big because they were originally bred for their meat. Aside from their size, the Continental giant also sheds.
They're a lot more work than you would imagine. I had no idea how much coat they would shed, even when they're supposed to shed twice a year. And when he sheds, you could make a duvet cover. It would fill.
Lee Skip is one of the UK's most successful Continental giant breeders. She started 12 years ago.
They're just so placid and docile, and as I say, to me they're more like having a dog than a rabbit. As you can tell, he's quite happy sitting on the settee. He jumps up and watches telly.
These rabbits can't follow quite as many commands as a dog, but they are a lot less expensive. Jackson is great with kids, even babies, but some people are quite intimidated at first.
He is quite a sort of pleasant surprise for people, but yeah, they sort of aren't quite sure of what he's going to do when he's sort of staring them out, which he will do.
These continental giants are charming potential pet owners across the UK. In fact, they could give the Easter Bunny a hop for his money. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
A morale boost in Taiwan. Taiwanese people are rushing to buy a patch showing Winnie the Pooh getting beat up by a native Formosan black bear. Many in Taiwan's Air Force are wearing the patch for its political significance. NTD's Colin Fredrickson has more.
Winnie the Pooh symbolizes communist China in the depiction on the patch. The image of the cartoon bear is banned in China because it has been used to poke fun at the appearance of Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The Formosan black bear is an endangered bear species native to Taiwan. Formosa is a former name for Taiwan.
The idea behind the creation of this badge was to use Taiwan's Formosan black bear as a symbol to make an encouraging badge for our national armed forces. Since they surrounded Taiwan in August of last year, the Chinese Communist Party's military has been incessantly creating problems for our military and our national security. This is why I wanted to create this badge, to cheer on our troops.
Alex Xu designed the patch and has sold it at his shop since last year. But he saw a spike in orders after Taiwan's military news agency published a photo of the patch on the arm of a pilot.
We have placed more orders for the badges because after the media reported on them yesterday, some orders have been coming in. But currently our stockpile is not enough, so we have put in more orders to the factory that makes the badges.
Taiwan's Air Force said it does not particularly encourage its members to wear the patch, but it will maintain an open attitude to anything that raises morale. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
Environmental, social, and governance investing. What's the real impact of it? I spoke to Epoch Times financial reporter Kevin Stockland to hear his perspective. He's also a former Wall Street banker and expert on ESG, the subject of his latest documentary. Kevin Stockland, financial reporter for the Epoch Times and producer of the Shadow State documentary. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
I want to ask you about how ESG could have contributed to SVB's collapse. But first, let's give our audience some background. In layman's terms, what is ESG?
ESG it's both an ideology and an industry. So as an ideology, it's an umbrella term. It includes everything from climate change to racial equity. They throw in things like gun control and abortion rights as well. But it's also an industry. It has tens of trillions of dollars supporting it, which is our money, our retirement money, our investment savings, and things like that investment managers use to take their position as shareholders and arm twist corporations into going along with this ideology. In a nutshell, it's a way of diverting corporate management away from their core responsibilities of serving shareholders and in the direction of pursuing a political agenda.
Now, SVB received high marks from ESG ranking authorities. Do you think its pursuit to align with ESG values played a part in its collapse? And if so, why?
They did. They received top marks in ESG governance from rating agencies like Morningstar and S&P. They're some of the top ESG raters. And they received these marks because they are pursuing things like diversity, DEI training, quotas and hiring and things like this. The problem when it comes to managing a bank is that things like people's skin color and their gender have very little to do with their ability to manage risk. And we saw the effects of that with the collapse of SVB.
Okay, so I'd like to dig into that a little more. How do ESG principles impact the financial health of the companies that follow them?
So you can, for example, taking a look at their 10K reports, which are public filings with the SEC. So SVB was obviously heading into huge trouble. They had amassed a very large portfolio of fixed rate securities that were underwater because interest rates were going up. They had a huge mismatch between their assets and their liabilities. And so they were very exposed to depositors wanting their money back. However, if you look at their filings, they spent 3 full paragraphs going into their risks of climate change, how that would impact the bank if temperatures went up. They had a DEI executive. They did not have a risk management executive on the bank's board between April and January. So clearly they were their priorities were focused on other things rather than managing the bank. And they also were getting this direction from the San Francisco Fed, which manages them. So that Fed branch was also prioritizing climate change and racial equity. And one of the CEO of SVB actually sat on the board of the Fed. So it's obvious that they were focused on DEI issues versus basic management bank issues.
In an Epoch Times article, you wrote that bank failures such as SVB highlight the risk of using ESG in Americans' pension funds. Could you explain that for us?
So one of the big fights that's going on right now is between Congress and the Biden administration. The Biden administration would like pension funds to be able to invest our retirement money according to these ESG criteria. And Congress has passed a bipartisan measure to fight back against that, which the president used his first veto to block. Now, it's very interesting in the case of SVB, because here we see a textbook case of a company that is using ESG criteria to manage its risk. And we saw the effects of that. And you know, the great irony of this is that their clients were a lot of tech companies that typically support these sort of progressive ESG criteria. However, when they saw that they were about to lose their money in SVB's collapse, they were the first to rush for the exits. Now, the problem is that even though the Biden administration stepped in and made all of these depositors whole and guaranteed all of their deposits, when we invest our pension money, we're equity investors. And so we are the ones who are going to get wiped out when these companies go south. There's no guarantee for equity investors or pensioners when ESG impacts the returns of their investments.
Kevin Stockland, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.